So before beginning, quick review. We began this podcast by saying that a lot more was possible, but it would take a number of setup episodes. We described the current relationship between the airport communities, the port, the FAA, as a casino. And we said that there are a whole bunch of casinos all around this great country, and they all have slightly different rules. The reason we started this podcast was because people would tell us that we were dealing in abstractions, all this history stuff. They're like, what do we do now? The SAMP is starting to vaguely come into view, and city councils are going to come back from their holidays in the south of France. Want you to watch all of these setup episodes, okay, and then act. This is not the abstraction. This really is the cookbook. So after the casino thing, we said that the airport is a parking lot, or rather two parking lots. And we called it a parking lot because the airport operator does not control the roads. Today, we're going to talk about the roads and a time at Sea-Tac where people tried to challenge the thing that everyone wants. So we're going straight to the hot takes today. One of the biggest gripes airport groups all over the country seem to have is we can't engage with the FAA, and it's perfectly true. We've come to realize that is just another distraction from the casino. The FAA does conduct webinars every few years. They did one on Sea-Tac a while back, and we have a link in the show notes to it, which you should definitely watch because it will flesh out a lot of the stuff in this episode. But frankly, there's really no point in conducting regular listening sessions unless you want to see some poor schnook get up in front of people and get yelled at about the same questions over and over again that they cannot do anything about. If it was an elected, that'd be one thing. But, civil servants, come on. But they do this one thing at webinars which does kind of irk us. They call the airspace the railroad in the sky. Now, looking back, you could say the industry developed very fast, so it probably made sense to model it on railroads, but that's probably not what they're talking about at all. It's probably just a fun thing for them to say. But those blues songs about how I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks? There's this implication to zoning. You keep the industry on one side of the tracks along with, the less desirables. And the nice, clean people live on the other side, away from all the noise and bad stuff. Funny thing, years ago, we used to live at Shilshole, now one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Puget Sound. And it does have an old BNSF freight line rolling below. But every night at 3 a.m., let me tell you, that whistle is so much louder than any of these China Air flights people complain about. I mean, it's unbelievable. But, everybody puts up with it because, again, it's the expectation that it's always been there and it's probably not going to change much over time. And, hey, $1 million view, right? But that's not how the railroad in the sky rolls. The national airspace is like three basic types of roads. There's the tower from the runway to about 6 miles, and there are basically 8 departure paths and 5 arrival paths, or is it the other way around? Kill me. I'm being difficult like this for a reason. You'll see. After that, there is a separate independent set of control called the TRACON, which goes from 610 out to 50. The TRACON concerns places like Enumclaw, where they've been fighting like badges to avoid a second airport. But they notice more planes overhead even without a second airport because, wouldn't you know it, they just happen to be on one of the TRACON paths. And after that, after about 50 miles out, flights are handed off to a third set of controllers called en route, and they take flights across the vast expanse of our beautiful country. You can generally tell when that handoff occurs because you'll hear the captain say something like, "We've reached our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. The bar is now open." Now, when the Three Stooges graduated med school, they took an oath.
For duty and humanity.
The FAA also has a slogan, and if you take nothing else away from this little presentation, remember it: safety and efficiency. It is in every piece of legislation concerning the agency. It is their mandate, their mission, their mantra. It's probably on the door of the men's room. We're snippy about it because all the FAA has to do is utter that magic phrase, and presto, any and all community concerns just disappear. Sea-Tac's second runway opened around the same time that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, got going in 1970 with this ginormous law called NEPA, National Environment Policy Act. And as with all major laws, there are unintended consequences. We usually think of those as being bad, but sometimes they're good. In this case, since airport noise and pollution are injurious to human health, the moment the runway opened and communities got a load of what a real international airport was like, they had an instant and well-timed weapon to fight back. Now, the FAA quickly realized that if they did not get on top of this, there were going to be no more expansions of American aviation. I mean, look how hard it is to even permit a sidewalk or anything these days. You know, you have to get a NEPA thing and a SEPA thing. It's ridiculous. So they were well disposed to come to the table along with the port and community members, and they created this very noble thing called the Sea-Tac Communities Plan. The entire framework of property buyout, sound insulation, monitoring, planning committees, everything people talk about now in terms of having a good relationship between airports and communities, that was all old 1970s stuff, the golden age. And to give you an idea of how attitudes were back when things were pretty groovy, the FAA was at the table every month, and the airport director at the time made this solemn promise: as we do better, you'll do better. The airport will grow, but you will have a seat at the table, and everyone will share in the benefits of that prosperity. Seriously. No, really, Don said that. Unfortunately, the golden age lasted about 2 years. The airline industry had already begun lobbying against all this nonsense. And by 1980, Congress had begun to move environmental law around airports away from the EPA and over to the FAA. Now, to give you a sense of the cynicism, the Airport Noise and Capacity Act of 1990, ANCA, gives explicit primacy to safety and efficiency. Noise, which is in the title, is definitely there, but it's like Congress is very explicit. There can be no impediments to the airspace. The point of ANCA was bye-bye community lawsuits. Now, by that time, 1990, people who had moved south or north to escape the second runway started saying, "It's like the airplanes followed me." And what they meant was that by 1990, the second runway was itself approaching maximum capacity. They were already talking about a third runway. And the FAA established the modern structure of arrival and departure paths we still have today. It was called the four-post plan. And again, communities sued. But this time, it was not people right next door. This time, it was people miles away saying that the impacts of shifting the railroad in the sky was arbitrary and bothering them. You know, if someone wants to build a road next to your house or even a sewer pipe, the Constitution says that you, or at least your city, has some say-so in that. They can't just do it or take it. And if someone wanted to drill for oil under your house, same thing, right? I mean, you have, or your city has at least some rights, both at the ground level and under the ground, all the way to, China. But what about up in the air? What say do you or your city have as to someone trying to build a railroad in the sky? And the answer is none, nada, nix, bupkis. The four-post plan clearly established, and it's been reaffirmed over and over and over, that this is not the evil FAA or the diabolical Port of Seattle or any airport. It is the express will of Congress. And again, all they have to do is say the magic words, safety and efficiency, or rather, do a study demonstrating that establishing a new path is necessary to promote safety and efficiency, and abracadabra. And because the law is what it is, even when the FAA tries to make things better, it just makes it worse. You know how the FAA is currently getting beat up for antiquated equipment and all that stuff? Well, they were getting beat up about that same stuff in 2000. They were developing back then a series of upgrades to improve, wait for it, safety and efficiency. And that's called Next Gen. Now, one goal of Next Gen was to concentrate flight paths, both side to side and front to back. And using GPS and all sorts of electronic gizmos, they have been remarkably successful at that. If you sense aircraft whizzing overhead every 45 seconds now, or see parallel landings at the airport that did not happen before, you are not imagining things. That is GPS technology making it possible to eventually double previous flows. It sounds terrible for us, but it actually kind of sort of had a noble goal from one perspective: to impact fewer people. So there's some philosophy here. Since all of us use the airport and at least in some ways benefit from it, is it more just and fair to concentrate the pain over the same group of people? Or is it fairer, would it be fairer to somehow, spread the pain a bit, like 5 flights over here and 10 flights over there and 8 flights over there? Discuss! Because at the end of the day, Next Gen was not only the will of Congress, it reflected a not-so-great truth about airport communities. The people who found change flight paths unfair in 1970 or 1990 were told, "Don't like it, move." Everyone tends to be viewed by the FAA about the same as people at a city council meeting protesting a new development that will, block their view. Get it? It wasn't a problem until it started bothering you. So if you find the FAA insensitive in that way, that's the reason. It was, again, the will of Congress that you not have the same zoning rights as you would if a neighbor tried to block your view, or if someone were trying to build a road right next to you. When it comes to the national airspace, Congress is all about that YIMBY. Can we talk? We're not saying it's impossible to change flight paths. We're just saying that this is why we call it Mount Everest. This is why we tell people not to start here. Okay, now that we've talked a little bit about the roads and made you all depressed, we want to pivot back to the parking lot, which is a much more productive discussion in the short term. It would be completely disingenuous to suggest that the Port of Seattle has no control over any of this. But that is exactly what the airport used to say. As late as 2018, former Director Little would say at town halls with a straight face, "We do not generate demand." Just like that. Port staff would say that they were only responding to organic traffic because, gosh darn it, under FAA law, they can't restrict takeoffs and landings. Want to know something else that is organic? Because while they were saying stuff like that, they were also building out a ton of new capacity, including a shiny international arrivals facility precisely to market to Asia, one of their key strategic goals. If there was some unbiased traffic planner at the FAA, more traffic would go to places with more capacity, like Portland, which is much larger, rather than our tiny parking lot. There's not some unbiased traffic planner like that. This is the free market in action. The Port of Seattle wants the economic growth. They have demonstrated they can build the technology to make it happen, and they competed hard to win it. Okay. The FAA controls aircraft once they're moving, including the railroad in the sky. We don't like that metaphor because not only are these routes dynamic, you can add dramatic amounts of capacity without actually building anything. They're unlike any other mode of transportation except for maybe, ships at sea, because they are not subject to local control. But the FAA is not Voldemort. All this is the express will of Congress. They're mainly civil servants, the cop on the beat enforcing the laws you don't like. And historically, airport residents have not shown an interest in airport impacts so long as they don't go over my house. That attitude has made it far too easy to divide communities and achieve nothing. But despite all of that, the owner of the parking lot, the port, does have a lot to do with capacity. It has successfully distracted communities from noticing that by blaming the FAA, while it continues to aggressively market for as much business as its increasingly efficient technology will allow. All productive environmental law occurred in those very groovy 70s. For us, that meant the Sea-Tac Communities Plan. Back then, the port made it clear that it was their plan for the airport to continue to grow. They also made a promise. As we do better, you'll do better. But if no one bothers to remind them, why should they bother making good on any of it?